Susanu continued speaking cryptically, referring to YuWon's past as a possible rancor. YuWon responded vaguely, frustrating Susanu, who just wanted answers. Activating his Kwang Nan, YuWon analyzed Susanu's essence, deliberately proposing a wager and insisting Susanu answer his questions. Susanu eagerly accepted, brandishing his weapon. Thus, a wager between YuWon and Susanu was recorded. At this moment, YuWon once again sensed the presence of countless grudges. He believed these spirits were directed towards him, and he understood why Susanu had left the dungeon. It wasn't due to being haunted by souls, achievements, or items he obtained after slaughtering countless people. Susanu wasn't like that. He used the system to retain his body, even in death, to fight even more. The Thanho within YuWon continuously poured out, aiming towards Susanu. A sinister smile spread across Susanu's face as the Thanho almost engulfed the room, the system displaying the words, "Exterminate the ruthless knight." Kaine's voice echoed in YuWon's ears, asking if he was done with Susanu. Suddenly, Susanu's eerie laughter filled the air. YuWon immediately sensed the danger. Susanu's aura was at a different level, one obtained after killing thousands of rankers, hundreds of thousands of players, and millions of people. Susanu, now very pleased to have someone like YuWon here, hoped YuWon wouldn't disappoint him. Taking the initiative, Susanu advanced towards YuWon, continuing to play with him. The pressure from Susanu made YuWon extremely tense. Drawing his sword, YuWon tried to deflect Susanu's attacks but couldn't resist his destructive power. It seemed like YuWon was being pushed back. Susanu grew increasingly intrigued as he advanced towards YuWon, both unleashing ferocious attacks. However, YuWon's demeanor was in stark contrast to Susanu's enjoyment. He was incredibly tense. YuWon quickly activated his Kanhanho skill, his muscles bulging as he attacked Susanu. The pressure in the room immediately increased and the atmosphere grew tense. YuWon attempted to focus on his target when suddenly, a surprising scene unfolded before him. Susanu's blindfolded hand unexpectedly appeared, grabbing YuWon's shoulder, and he said, "Finally caught you." But not only did Susanu catch him, YuWon also grabbed Susanu's shoulder. The system announced that YuWon had attacked the ruthless knight, Susanu, with Thanho. Thanho surrounded Susanu, who quickly moved backward, but YuWon's Thanho clung to his leg. YuWon looked at the Susanu before him, realizing the vast distance between them. He was inferior to Susanu in every aspect, and even Thanho had no effect on Susanu. Susanu looked at the flames burning on him mockingly, asking YuWon about these flames. Susanu's laughter brought back memories for YuWon. A hidden figure had appeared back then and suggested he go and kill Arthur. Excited for battle, and now YuWon was doing something similar, stirring up Susanu's desire for battle. YuWon knew he was inferior to Susanu in every aspect, but in his dictionary, there were no words like give up. He continued to wield his sword. Susanu kept charging forward, relentlessly attacking YuWon with fierce strikes. Although YuWon managed to evade each of Susanu's attacks, it only left Susanu increasingly frustrated. He believed he had relied too much on YuWon. Quickly, he decided to end this here. YuWon swiftly brought his sword up, struggling to block Susanu's strikes. In doing so, his sword scraped against Susanu's, causing YuWon to stagger backward. Surprisingly, YuWon then controlled his Thanho to envelop Susanu. The ground trembled once again, followed by a loud explosion. Susanu began to feel intrigued. Ignoring Thanho enveloping his body, he exclaimed to YuWon, "Finally, you're using it. Don't die too soon. There are many things I want to hear from you." Drops of sweat fell from YuWon's brow as he started to lose himself in thought. He wasn't Chiuhansu. The reason he could hear the dead speak was because of the gauntlet. But why did Kaine absorb souls? And what Susanu said after seeing Kaine? He had told YuWon about the glove's special abilities, but why hadn't YuWon used it? "Your trump card," Susanu taunted. "The Oceanite has the power to dominate the seas, the Celestite to rule the heavens, and the Darkite." YuWon seemed to understand something, radiating a light Susanu longed for. Susanu became even more excited. Great, now it's really starting, he said as Kaini summoned the Hell Gate. Yuwon coldly looked at Susanu and uttered 2 words, "Follow me." Behind Yuwon, the gates of hell slowly revealed themselves. Susanu grew more exhilarated, seeing what he desired most. The battle was truly beginning. But Yuwon's actions were completely different from what Susanu expected. Than Ho surrounded him, carrying souls, and his arrogant demeanor vanished. Susanu couldn't fathom what Yuwon intended to do, why he could do such outlandish things. Yuwon calmly replied, "No, you're the one who told me about the power of Kaini." Yuwon emphasized each word, absolute control over death. It had awakened. Susanu was now startled by his own mistake. He shouldn't have mentioned it to Yuwon. Now he had to bear the consequences, facing things beyond his imagination. Yet even so, Susanu didn't believe Yuwon could defeat him. "Can you kill me with that skill?" Susanu continued to charge, his sword aimed directly at Yuwon. They clashed swords, exerting immense pressure on their surroundings. Objects shattered under the force of their clash. Yuwon deliberately retrieved his sword, activating Kunhanho once more. Muscles on his arm swelled as hell was summoned again. Yuwon even dared to attack Susanu, calling him nothing but a whetstone. Susanu wasn't a fool. He noticed Yuwon's change but considered it insignificant. While Yuwon had changed, it wasn't enough to sway Susanu. In Susanu's memory, Yuwon's eyes, resolute and never giving up, would always find a solution, no matter the circumstances. The 2 opposing forces clashed again, pushing each other back. It was in this moment that Susanu realized he had lost control. The deathly gaze of Kaini appeared before him, and he had yet to understand the current situation. Yuwon's Than Ho continued to rush in, surrounding Susanu. Susanu's agonizing screams echoed. He was utterly bewildered. Why was he feeling pain? Yuwon looked at Susanu's current state of agony and slowly said to him, "You see, you're already afraid. The flames of fear are burning within you." Susanu tried to endure the pain, running over to Yuwon. Completely losing his composure, Susanu couldn't accept being defeated by someone who had just stepped into this realm like Yuwon. A smirk crept onto Yuwon's lips as he uttered 2 words, "Stop it." Susanu's sword, nearing Yuwon's head, suddenly halted, suspended in midair. His entire body stiffened, unable to move. Yuwon, with the Kaini gauntlet, gently touched Susanu's head, saying, "It doesn't matter how high a ranker you are. Right now, you're just a ghost. This is a fitting end for someone as arrogant as you." Susanu's screams echoed as his body dissolved in an instant, his soul absorbed by the Kaini gauntlet. The challenge of level 11 had concluded. Yuwon has completed Susanu's dungeon. He obtained Susanu's soul, followed by a series of reward notifications sent to Yuwon. Yuwon looked up, completing the dungeon test. Took more time than he thought. Yuwon left Susanu's tower. He went to the wall of the first floor. Yuwon now could be sure. Susanu's soul no longer resides within his body then. He began to check the items he had obtained in Susanu's test. He received Excalibur's sword. With this sword, can quickly empower the wielder. But it also corrodes the strength and life of the user. The next reward he received was the title, Tu Vuon, which is also the skill of Hades. With this title, Yuwon became a king. He can absorb the souls of dead creatures, can also transfer souls into the body using mana, can summon dead creatures using mana, and especially, resentment can make dead creatures stronger. Yuwon looked at the glove. The title Tu Vuon, did he receive it? Not a reward for completing the dungeon, but a reward for using Kaini. A combat soul user. This surpasses his imagination. The soul inside the glove asked him why. Yuwon continued. Although he already had a title related to Chiu Hansu, he didn't know how to use it. The soul reminded him. The creatures in Susanu's tower have both body and soul. If Yuwon could use it, why didn't he find a soulless body before? Thanks to the reminder glove, Yuwon suddenly remembered the function of summoning dead creatures by using the mana of the title. Yuwon just looked at the glove and continued, seeing that he had become a master of a Chiu Hansu. Thanks for the help. The soul inside the glove began to feel uncomfortable. How could Yuwon compare him to a lower Chiyohansu? The soul emphasized each word to Yuwon. I am Arthur, the king of knights. Immediately after that, Yuwon summoned his first undead creature. The soul of Arthur flew out from within the glove and entered the lifeless body. Arthur was extremely angry with this appearance. He covered his face and cried out, "What in the world returns me to my old body?" Although Yuwon felt sorry, he had to explain. Susanu's tower has been destroyed. Your original body is gone. You should be satisfied now. Yuwon then looked back at the glove. He asked the soul inside if he could go now. Susanu should fulfill his promise. The soul of Susanu escaped from within. He appeared in the form of a flame, feeling extremely uncomfortable. He couldn't believe that he himself would one day take on this form. Uncomfortably, he asked Yuwon, "So, do you want to ask anything related to this fool?" What Yuwon wanted to ask was indeed related to Arthur. He wanted to know who killed the Night King. But even Susanu didn't know the answer. He also didn't know who killed Arthur. In the eyes of many, Susanu was despicable, but he kept his promise. Although he didn't know who killed Arthur, he could show Yuwon his memories. Susanu immediately said, and he took Yuwon into his memories. The conversation between Susanu and a mysterious figure immediately appeared before Yuwon. Yuwon stood still, listening to every word of the dialogue between Susanu and that mysterious figure in black. He heard it all. The face of the one who had proposed Susanu to kill Arthur seemed like Yuwon had encountered somewhere before, a supernatural being, a creature that could become anything and do anything, and was also an ancient entity that had infiltrated this place before. That was none other than the manipulative outsider. The outsider spread his wings. He asked Susanu, "Can it touch that desire within you?" At that moment, Susanu also felt extremely interested. Seeing Susanu's intrigued expression, the outsider continued, "The deaths of kings, of knights, are nothing more than tiny seeds. However, these tiny seeds will soon sprout throughout the entire tower." Susanu became increasingly fascinated, and he loudly declared, "I will dance to your tune." The timeline concludes. Yuwon left Susanu's mind. Susanu, smiling, asked Yuwon, "Do you see it clearly?" "I don't know who that person is. But not long after I met him, the Jegintomachia incident occurred. Although I couldn't fully enjoy it, due to Hades' interference." Yuwon remained silent, listening to Susanu's words. Yuwon's expression fell under Susanu's gaze. Curiously, he asked, "You seem to know that person's identity very well." Yuwon replied with resentment, "You know that outsider well. He killed your friend and you, and he's the one I'll kill in the future." After a long period of fighting in the tower, Susanu returned Yuwon to his lodging. Lying on the bed, Yuwon pondered. After returning to the past, he had quickly completed everything. Therefore, he thought everything was going smoothly. But those outsiders had taken a step ahead and were plotting something. It had been almost 1,000 years since Arthur's disappearance, and it was close to the time when those seeds would be harvested, related to Arthur's essence, which was now with Lancelot, the current king of England. The more Yuwon thought, the more confused he felt. What major accidents had happened related to Arthur? But no matter how Yuwon thought now, Arthur had become a hidden card of England. Perhaps Yuwon had to climb the tower himself and witness it for everyone's sake. He needed to quickly change this game plan. Yuwon drifted off to sleep like that. He saw the towering tower collapsing slowly in front of him. Everyone's body was covered in wounds. As Yuwon turned around and walked towards them, Merlin and Asura looked at him with difficulty. "Except for me." Suddenly, a giant monster appeared in front of everyone. All the gods in the tower were ready to fight. Yuwon rushed forward as the vanguard, and Hercules ran up to Yuwon's side, saying, "It's quite surprising. Can't believe you're leading the charge." Yuwon blamed himself, thinking if he had taken the lead earlier, how many lives could have been saved. Yuwon continued to advance forward. It was as if he was saying to the outsiders, "No matter where you are in the world, no matter what time you're in, I will kill you no matter what for everyone. Yuwon's sword pointed straight ahead. Yuwon startled awake, quickly getting out of bed. He reassured himself that he wouldn't sit idly by while the outsiders executed their plans. This was just the beginning. Yuwon glanced out the window. Perhaps before he continued his journey up the tower, he would visit Vulcaro. Just the thought made him fearful. He was sure he'd get an earful from him for not visiting earlier. However, life wasn't like a dream. Yuwon appeared before Vulcaro. Vulcaro gave him a thunder hammer, the pain making him kneel to the ground. Yuwon shed a few tears inside. Not only was he scolded, but also lectured. Vulcaro, furious, asked him, "What are you, a little brat from your family, doing here only now? Get lost, you little brat." Yuwon slowly picked up the hammer and handed it to him. Trying to endure the pain, he said, "I feel like you'll calm down if I take a hit. It's better if you see me show some remorse like this." Yuwon's victimized attitude truly left Vulcaro speechless. Vulcaro, fuming, asked him, "Lately, you haven't been participating in the tower challenges. What have you been doing for the past few months?" Observing Vulcaro's demeanor at this moment, it seemed he was genuinely worried about Yuwon's absence. For the past few months, he even knew that Yuwon hadn't been participating in the tower climb challenges. Yuwon recounted to him, "I just completed a hidden dungeon, so it took up quite a bit of my time." Vulcaro looked at Yuwon with a strange expression. In his thoughts, perhaps Yuwon would continue to venture into strange places and continue doing things unlike anyone else. Then he threw something to Yuwon. Yuwon hastily opened it. It was a refined crystal for sailing on the sea. Vulcaro had helped Yuwon refine. Yuwon looked at the information displayed on the crystal before him. Other than a different attribute, it wasn't much different from the Haktan crystal. However, there was a line of text on the attribute card that puzzled him. "Rule the vast seas." Vulcaro unexpectedly asked Yuwon to lend him his glove. Yuwon immediately threw the glove to him. Vulcaro explained to Yuwon that he would create an additional space for him to carry another ocean crystal. Yuwon couldn't hide his joy. Only Vulcaro had thought of him. Vulcaro pursed his lips, saying he was just completing what he had started. He told Yuwon to wait for about half a month, then he would return the glove to him. Vulcaro quickly got back to work, reminding Yuwon that it would be great if Kaini could use 2 types of power, but he could only use 1 piece for 1 item. Yuwon looked at Vulcaro, starting to feel conflicted. Perhaps he should give him some hints about the future. He suddenly asked Vulcaro if he could make Kaini stronger. Vulcaro looked at Yuwon suspiciously, wondering what he meant. Yuwon explained that it meant making an item stronger. He began to suggest to Vulcaro by saying, for example, using different components or just using mana alone. The expression on Vulcaro's face suddenly froze, as if he had thought of something from Yuwon's suggestions. Yuwon watched Vulcaro's expression intently. Unconsciously, Vulcaro muttered, "Is this one a genius or what?" Yuwon was amazed. Vulcaro had just called him a genius. He kept bombarding Vulcaro with questions, asking if he had just called him a genius. This made Vulcaro extremely angry, repeatedly hitting Yuwon on the head with the hammer, saying he would only call him that when Yuwon's rotten kin do so. After Yuwon left, Vulcaro kept thinking about his words regarding enhancing Kaini's power. He had asked Vulcaro if it was possible to enhance it using different components or just mana. The more Vulcaro thought about it, the more he felt Yuwon had potential. Perhaps he could accomplish great things in the future. At that moment, outside Vulcaro's forge, there were continuous damp noises. Vulcaro stood up uncomfortably, remarking that it was early in the morning. So who was banging on his door so loudly? Immediately, a sense of unease rose in Vulcaro's heart. Could it be the Olympian gods coming to find him? He picked up his hammer and slowly walked to the door, which opened wide in an instant as Tongokong stepped in. Vulcaro immediately recognized the familiar figure of the rotten monkey. He began to speak to Tongokong, saying that even his butt could recognize Tongokong's house as a relative's place, asking what business had brought him here. He sarcastically remarked that Tongokong's real body was probably busy arguing with the celestial beings by now. Tang Gokong felt a bit hurt. It had been a long time since he had seen Vulcaro, but he didn't expect him to be so harsh. Vulcaro looked at the weapon Tang Gokong was carrying and asked him why he had switched weapons. Tang Gokong casually explained that he found something better and discarded the old one. This one belonged to the Dragon King, which was not originally meant to be used as a weapon. Vulcaro flew into a rage, accusing Tang Gokong of abandoning his weapon. Tang Gokong quickly surrendered to Vulcaro, saying that he didn't come here today to dwell on the past, but to ask if Vulcaro knew a kid named Kim YuWon. With his fiery eyes, Tang Gokong, who had mastered the art of challenging everything, could see through deceit. Vulcaro burst into a mischievous laugh, knowing he couldn't deceive Tang Gokong. But because of YuWon, he wouldn't just yield to Tang Gokong. In a challenging tone, Vulcaro replied to Tang Gokong, saying he didn't know who that was, asking if Tang Gokong wanted him to say it again. How many times did he have to repeat it? Tang Gokong held his head in frustration. Vulcaro was truly driving him crazy. Tang Gokong began to threaten Vulcaro, saying if he didn't confess, he would take his life. Vulcaro, unwilling to lose to Tang Gokong, also began to emit mana. If Tang Gokong wanted a fight, he would indulge him. At the same time, YuWon made his way to a dungeon, preparing for the level 21 test. As he appeared, he immediately caught everyone's attention, sparking murmurs behind his back. Irritated, YuWon faced them, furrowing his brows deliberately as he addressed them. "Who do you think you are? Talking like this about others right in front of them. You want my attention that badly." Simultaneously, the system issued a message to all players. The level 21 test was about to begin with a crystal forming. Their task: protect this crystal from the horde of monsters approaching. Within the player teams were an unspecified number of infiltrators, capable of sabotaging the crystal if the player count dropped. If the crystal was destroyed, they'd all lose. They were instructed to find and eliminate these infiltrators. This announcement caused panic among the participants. Could it be referring to the group of infiltrators lurking behind this mist? YuWon stepped slowly into the crowd, gripping his weapon tightly, deliberately trying to intimidate the players. "Are you really that scared of a simple test like this?" he taunted. "Some warriors you are, trembling in fear before some infiltrators. Pathetic." Then he approached one of the players, smirking. With a swift motion, he severed the player's lifeline, causing their head to roll onto the ground, shattering into a pile of mud. The witnessing players were utterly shocked. "I'll find those infiltrators," YuWon declared confidently, "and make sure they won't get anywhere near the crystal. Your task is to deal with the monsters. Don't get in my way." As the players observed the aura of determination emanating from YuWon, they couldn't help but feel a profound fear. The infiltrator YuWon was facing seemed truly terrifying. The dungeon creatures continued to howl and attack, while the players fought back together. Seeing the creatures approaching relentlessly, Rehar stepped forward, loudly urging everyone to remain calm and focus on the monsters. "YuWon will handle the infiltrators," he reassured them. Some players began to relax, thinking that with YuWon backing them up, everything would be fine. Rehar reminded them not to let their guard down, urging them to remain vigilant. Suddenly, Rehar felt a tap on his back. He turned around to find YuWon there. "Sorry for being too focused on the battle and not paying attention to you." YuWon's voice came unexpectedly from behind. Rehar was surprised to recognize it. "Isn't that Kim YuWon?" he thought. Rehar began to feel anxious. He had just encountered YuWon. Why was there another YuWon here? Could it be? Was there someone who looked exactly like one? YuWon took the initiative to ask Rehar, "Why aren't you suspicious of that Kim YuWon? After encountering the first Songtrung, he hasn't found anyone else. I know it takes time to investigate, but he's already found one. Isn't that too good to be true?" Rehar still seemed unsure. "You standing behind me is the real YuWon," he maintained his belief. "As long as Kim YuWon is still there, no one dares to get close to the crystal. I thought the person beside me didn't seem very trustworthy, so I dared to speak like that. There's no need to doubt. Everyone around will find the infiltrators." Rehar reminded YuWon to focus and not be distracted, urging him to concentrate on the monsters ahead. YuWon smirked, his lips curling upwards. "Things are getting more interesting," he remarked. "I really want to know how far that Kim YuWon, whom everyone trusts so much, can go." The time remaining for the challenge was 25-12. Despite the long duration, the players had begun to feel weary after continuous fighting against the monsters. After a while, they started to whisper to each other, determined to eliminate all the Songtrum to end the test. From beginning to end, YuWon remained stationary. They were suspicious. Was YuWon really earnestly searching? Songtrum's false smile curved up. He continued his strategic manipulation of everyone's psyche. He began to speak. "It seems they're more vigilant now. After seeing me kill the first person, they'd probably plan to blend into the crowd to pressure us." The false YuWon slowly raised his weapon and made a suggestion to everyone. "If anyone seems suspicious, speak up. If we agree to choose the most suspicious person to kill, then the test will be almost over." Everyone immediately became anxious. Did YuWon want them to doubt each other? One player nervously responded to his suggestion. "How can we kill based on suspicion alone? There's no clear evidence." At that moment, someone unexpectedly raised their hand and loudly said to the false YuWon, "I suspected someone from the start." Then one after another, "I did too, I did too." Internally, the players began to chatter. Some said it was like a market. The fatigue along with the horde of monsters was making them increasingly less alert. They continuously pushed those suspicious individuals into a corner. The false YuWon immediately stepped forward, preparing to send off the players leaving the tower. At that moment, the real YuWon stepped forward and immediately used his bare hands to grab the false YuWon's sword. The false YuWon turned his head back to look. Their eyes met. They just wanted to say a few more words. The false YuWon looked at YuWon with astonishment. He never expected someone to block his sword with just their hands. YuWon emphasized each word to the false YuWon. "So, the fox has revealed its tail." The players began to whisper to each other. Two young men stood before them, looking remarkably similar. The false YuWon gradually became uneasy. The person in front of him had a face very similar to the one he was impersonating. The real YuWon smiled at him, slowly saying, "I'll deal with you later." Then, activating the insight vision, revealing the truth of himself, the body of the false YuWon suddenly illuminated, as he slowly reverted to his true form. The players witnessing the scene of two YuWons facing each other couldn't help but be surprised. The YuWon they always trusted was actually a Songtrum. They began to feel something was amiss. If the YuWon they believed in was in agony as the imposter, then why did he attack a fellow Songtrum from the start? Confusion ensued. The false YuWon remained stubborn, trying to mask his true identity, but failing to convince as the real YuWon. Yet the one standing before him was the false YuWon. YuWon disregarded his words, willing to yield if he pleased. YuWon began to lower his sword at him, and his entire body immediately collapsed backward. The false YuWon had been dealt with. Next, he would deal with the remaining Songtrum. His gaze swept over, and the players began frantically to provide evidence of their innocence to YuWon, asserting they were not Songtrum. YuWon's gaze fell upon a player named Rehar. Rehar remained cautious towards YuWon, asking, "So, you're the real Kim YuWon, aren't you?" YuWon placed his sword at Rehar's throat, saying to him, "Who I am in this test doesn't matter." Rehar's teammates began to panic, constantly providing evidence of Rehar's innocence, stating he wasn't a Songtrum. Before the test began, they hadn't been apart for a minute. The corners of YuWon's mouth curved up. "If there's a team, then it's impossible for one of us to be a Songtrum, right?" Then, unexpectedly, he gripped Rehar's neck. Confused, Rehar asked YuWon what he meant by that. Rehar's teammates started to become agitated, loudly demanding YuWon release him, wanting to know who he was targeting. Rehar clenched his teeth, attempting to push away YuWon's arm, but YuWon still had the upper hand. Rehar's efforts ended with YuWon gaining control, immobilizing him with a knee joint lock. Yuwon's swift counterattack left Rehar unable to retaliate, his body reverting to its initial rigid state, before slowly transforming into a viscous substance. The members of Rehar's team were thrown into extreme panic. How could their leader possibly be aligned with the Songtrum? The surprising reaction of Rehar's comrades didn't escape Yuwon's notice. From the start, he had suspected Ra. After all, he was also a member of the Songtrum. Yuwon feigned astonishment as Rehar's sword pierced through his head. Impersonating a Songtrum member, playing the role of a mere player. Quite the act, Yuwon remarked with genuine surprise. Manipulating your own psyche, huh? You've certainly broadened my perspective. Yuwon loudly challenged the Songtrum, urging them to cut the chatter and settle the matter once and for all. Activating his sword, Yuwon swiftly dispatched all the imposters. The trial on level 21 quickly concluded. The system sent out a notification to everyone, informing them that players could now move on to the next level. Shortly after, as everyone had transitioned to the next level, within the dungeon, there remained a young man named Mamos. Slowly awakening, he found a figure sitting beside him. Yuwon. As soon as Yuwon noticed him waking up, he immediately urged him to sit up. Seeing Yuwon, Mamos hastily recoiled in fear. Yuwon began to inquire about Mamos' identity, but Mamos, still overwhelmed by fear, couldn't respond coherently. Yuwon quickly resorted to physical intimidation, which only heightened Mamos' terror. Eventually, Mamos managed to muster the courage to reveal his name. Yuwon then continued to speak, expressing skepticism about Mamos' affiliations. Despite the test having concluded, Mamos showed no signs of hostility, leaving Yuwon puzzled. However, he refrained from drawing any definitive conclusions about Mamos' nature. Mamos explained to Yuwon that he was indeed a member of the Songtrum, but also a player. Yuwon immediately recognized Mamos as a pure-blooded demon and inquired about his lineage. Mamos hesitated before disclosing that his father was Belial, the Demon King, the ruler of all Songtrum. Yuwon promptly used his insight to confirm the veracity of Mamos' words. According to Yuwon's knowledge, the Demon Lords Guild had to be on par with Olympus, placing Mamos on equal footing with Hargan. Yuwon further questioned Mamos about his intentions and whereabouts. Mamos sighed deeply, indicating that his story was lengthy and inappropriate for the current setting. However, he suddenly shifted his demeanor, expressing admiration for Yuwon. Mamos confessed to being a devoted fan of Yuwon, having closely followed his journey since the initial test on level 1, and becoming a fervent supporter after witnessing him in the martial arts competition. He promised to reflect on his actions and vowed never to behave similarly again. Yuwon, typically composed even in the face of danger, found himself perturbed by Mamos' words. What was particularly unsettling was Mamos' sincerity, without a trace of deceit. Yuwon speculated that perhaps Mamos had assumed his identity out of extreme admiration. Regardless, Yuwon believed that getting acquainted with Belial's son didn't pose any immediate threat. As Yuwon stood up, he forgave Mamos but had another request. He asked Mamos for his contact information, stating that since he had forgiven him, Mamos should assist him with a favor. A month later, Yuwon unexpectedly received a message from Mamos. He said, "I've been invited to participate in the next challenge, buddy. Haha, long time no see." Yuwon chuckled at the familiar phrase from Mamos, reflecting on how approachable this kid seemed. Yuwon continued to ponder over the crystal ball. In just 10 days, Mamos had climbed from level 22 all the way to level 24. If Olympus didn't intervene, it would be even easier. So, considering Ra's progress in climbing the tower, from now until the final level, it probably wouldn't pose much of a challenge for Yuwon. However, one thing puzzled Yuwon: Mamos' sudden message. He couldn't understand why Mamos would reach out to him. Just then, Yuwon received a message from Hargan, who informed him, "I'm currently climbing. On level 22, I suggest we arrange a meeting." Hargan had arrived early at their meeting spot, explaining to Yuwon, "I was too free, so I came here to wait. Let me tell you, I've climbed up to level 34. But now, there's a problem. The difficulty level keeps increasing the higher I climb." Hargan unexpectedly asked Yuwon about a rumor. Everyone's talking about it. I heard you possess the sea crystal. Your indifferent attitude confirms the rumors, doesn't it? Yuwon's aloof demeanor only fueled Hargan's certainty that the rumors were true. Hargan continued, "Thanks to you, now Olympus is in chaos. My father and I are practically avoiding each other. The atmosphere is tense, and you can guess what's coming next. Olympus will be busy settling internal disputes, leaving no time to spare for you." Hargan kindly reminded Yuwon, "In the future, you might actually be killed. So, I'll give you two options. Either surrender the crystal or submit to Olympus. If not, find a place where you can protect yourself, like Asgard or the Celestial Realm." Yuwon silently listened, setting down his teacup on the table. He seemed indifferent to Hargan's words. Hargan hurriedly asked Yuwon if he had finished speaking. "Have you finished?" Yuwon asked calmly, seemingly uninterested. Hargan, taken aback by Yuwon's apparent lack of concern, quickly asked if Yuwon had any intention of leaving. Yuwon responded casually, "What's with all the repetitive questions, buddy?" Then he inquired if Hargan had decided where he was going. Hargan began to raise his voice, exclaiming, "Of course, I've made a decision. Why else would I be sitting here talking to you? If I've made up my mind, then I'll talk. Otherwise, what's the point of meeting you?" Hargan then reverted to a serious tone, reminding Yuwon to be careful when reaching level 25, as the central area of Anqua would likely have a trap waiting for him. After Yuwon left, Hargan immediately contacted Apollo, recounting his conversation with Yuwon. He expressed frustration with Yuwon's stubbornness and wondered what was going on in his head. Next, he asked about Apollo's current situation. Apollo replied that he was still contemplating and seemed trapped in a cycle of indecision. Hargan earnestly questioned Apollo if he wouldn't regret his decisions, encouraging him to focus on becoming a ranker and further strengthening himself. Hargan followed Apollo's advice, cautioning Yuwon to be vigilant in the central area of Anqua. Apollo sighed deeply, regarding Yuwon as merely a lone player who might be arrogant. However, Hargan disagreed with Apollo's assessment, acknowledging Yuwon's formidable strength and citing examples of his victories against formidable opponents like Chryses, Hypnos, and Theseus. This time, Hargan believed that the outcome of the trap would be different. At the same time, Yuwon also began the challenge of the 24th floor. This challenge required players to stop the Dangu horde, with the number of Dangu summoned increasing with each stage. At the end of each stage, players would receive 10 points, and killing a Dangu would earn them an additional 5 points. If they wanted to summon a Dangu from the enemy side, it would cost them 10 points. Teams were not allowed to move outside the designated area, and players would lose if they exceeded the allowed range or surrendered. The remaining teams would then complete the test. Mamos ran up to Yuwon, showing great excitement. He felt fortunate to be placed with Yuwon's team. He even proposed to accompany Yuwon to the next floor, but was declined by Yuwon. Mamos was very curious about what Yuwon intended to do on the 25th floor, as Yuwon remained mysterious about it. The challenge quickly began, and the boundary circle appeared around each team. Each player was given a certain number of points. Yuwon currently had 10 points. Yuwon silently observed the situation. This challenge was similar to the previous one. With this number of points, they could only summon one Dangu. Members of the Kim YuWon team began to relax their guard because Yuwon was with them. Mamos, standing beside Yuwon, whispered, "See, everyone trusts you now." Yuwon replied, "They will regret it soon." This response left Mamos puzzled. The system started sending notifications one after another about a Dangu being summoned. Hundreds of Dangu were approaching. Members of Yuwon's team shouted, "It's already this crowded on the first floor? How many Dangu are there in total?" Mamos chuckled inwardly. "They're summoning so many cows. Shouldn't that help us earn points?" After observing the scene of the opponents continuously summoning Dangu, Mamos finally understood the deep meaning behind Yuwon's words. "I understand what you meant earlier," Mamos said. "They will choose to attack the team with the highest chance of winning, right?" His words were suddenly choked off. Yuwon was activating the Mana Sphere skill, creating 10 floating Mana Spheres above Mamos' head. Mamos intended to say something more, But YuWon interrupted him, saying, "Let's discuss later," and then began controlling the mana spheres to attack the horde of approaching Dengu. In just a moment, YuWon's mana spheres completely wiped out the horde of Dengu, disappearing from the ground. YuWon reminded everyone in his team to hold out as long as possible since the challenge had already begun, and everyone needed to put their best effort against the other players. His team immediately understood YuWon's intention. If they just stood by and watched, they would undoubtedly be eliminated. But in Mamos' eyes, YuWon looked extremely cool. In the area of Team 3, the members were gleefully discussing amongst themselves. "It seems like we hardly encounter any Dengu, right?" "Exactly as I thought. Everyone seems to think the same. It looks like the other teams have also chosen the same strategy. Let's pressure Kim YuWon's team to be eliminated first." Almost all members of the other team groups were summoning Dengu, acting in unison to push YuWon's team into a corner. In their eyes, only when YuWon's team was defeated would the real trial begin. The indifferent members of YuWon's team gradually began to realize that other teams were exerting pressure on them. When Mamos wanted to charge forward and attack the Dengu horde, YuWon unexpectedly intervened, urging everyone to resist until floor 10. Mamos started feeling anxious, unsure if YuWon was joking, and questioned whether they could endure until floor 10. He asked YuWon, "Can we make it?" YuWon gave Mamos a look and replied, "No. Didn't you say earlier, when hundreds of cows were gathered here, that we need to endure? I thought you were acting more like a demon." Mamos broke into a cold sweat, realizing the gravity of the situation. Dengu from other team groups were continuously summoned to attack YuWon's team, leaving YuWon's members bewildered about how the other teams had enough points to summon so many Dengu. Mamos quickly stood up and told everyone to take a break, saying he would handle it from now on. But before Mamos could even demonstrate his abilities, YuWon acted first. A series of mana spheres appeared in the sky, even more than before. YuWon, with the ability to control mana, had enhanced mana recovery speed by 10%, resistance to mana by 10%, sensitivity to mana by 10%, and better mana control. Despite this, he still felt inadequate. Before the regression, he had created 50 mana orbs, but now he wasn't sure how many more he could create. As the system announced the start of the 9th phase, YuWon was ready. Hundreds of mana orbs lined up in rows as he charged forward. The Dengu immediately exploded into pieces, accompanied by numerous notifications of YuWon's victories over them. The relentless attacks from other teams poured in as the 13th wave of assaults began. YuWon's Thean, heaven-destroying energy, had reached a completion level of 99.994%, and the level of mastery over Sethin Chaikin, killing heaven energy, had increased by 0%. YuWon called out to Mamos, instructing him to use summoning points to summon Dengu to attack other teams. YuWon's request left Mamos feeling unsettled. Wouldn't it be better to concentrate their forces for a single attack? With over 1,000 creatures charging towards them, Mamos questioned YuWon if it was really okay to make such a demand. YuWon, however, knew no exhaustion. For YuWon, exhaustion was still a distant concept. Even if it meant pushing himself to the limit, he would endure until the end. Others couldn't help but be astonished by what YuWon was demonstrating. Whispering among themselves, they marveled at the extent of his mana control. They wondered how he could manage it all. YuWon was clearly on a different level from them. His power rivaled that of a ranker, yet he wasn't one. Mamos couldn't help but feel envious of YuWon's current strength. It felt unjust how overpowering YuWon had become. Growing up in the midst of witnessing such power, Mamos, being part of the demon race, had never imagined such abilities, not even in his wildest dreams. Watching YuWon continuously defeat the Dengu, Mamos couldn't help but admire him even more. Despite all efforts, the mastery of Thean had only increased by 0%. After countless struggles to conquer the beasts, YuWon's mastery of Thean finally reached 100%, and Sathian was eradicated. He received a new stat. Mana power increased by 20 points. This skill was inherent to the demon race's body, allowing YuWon to control mana. Currently, his mastery level was at 0%. YuWon couldn't fathom receiving such a skill after the completion of Thien Sachetin. With a mana power increase of 20 points, he couldn't use it for leveling up, but it could be applied to all skills. YuWon raised both hands high, continuing to control the mana spheres. Mana power is the unique strength of Agma, similar to mana but with a crucial difference. It has a higher destructive nature. With the newly acquired skill, in just the blink of an eye, YuWon was able to sweep away all the dangu coming towards him. Everything happening before their eyes felt like a dream. YuWon left everyone from one surprise to another. Mamos, astonished and stuttering, said to YuWon, "Are you perhaps a demon? How can you control mana power? Something only demons can control." YuWon turned to look at Mamos, equally puzzled about how he could achieve such feats. He confided in Mamos about receiving the new skill and how everything unfolded like this. The partially disclosed story of YuWon only made people more horrified. No wonder, in the eyes of everyone, he seemed more like a demon than a human. Everything seen within his grasp. YuWon continued addressing everyone. "I have received everything I need now. Let's wrap up this matter." His mouth curved into a smirk. "I still have the means to handle anything beyond completion." With the current score of 24,355 points for his team, the time was ripe. This was when YuWon began his counterattack. He used 24,350 points to summon Dangu. Members of the opposing team started feeling disheartened, yawning and waiting for YuWon to surrender. They never expected YuWon to be so stubborn, resisting endlessly without admitting defeat. At that moment, they received a notification that Team 2 had summoned Dangu. They began to feel anxious, never imagining that YuWon could retaliate in such a situation. Then came a series of announcements. Team 2 has summoned a Dangu. Their expressions gradually turned to fear. Could their worst fears be coming true? Don't tell me Kim YuWon brought all of them here? How many points did he accumulate? People whispered to each other in fear, raising their weapons, preparing to defend themselves while urging their comrades to cover their backs. They held on to themselves for dear life. Each team hastily ordered defensive measures from their end. Although the teams made efforts, they were futile. Next came a barrage of notifications from the system. Team 1 eliminated. Team 4 eliminated. Team 7 eliminated. Each team fell one by one before YuWon. With each summon, he would summon approximately 200 more Dangu. As for the few others who had reached level 24, at least one or two teams would survive, but it was only a matter of time. YuWon's cold, calculating gaze looked into the distance ahead. He would continue summoning until they grew weary. YuWon's current demeanor even frightened his own teammates. To them, YuWon was nothing short of a demon. They felt fortunate to be on YuWon's team. Otherwise, who knows where their bodies would end up. In the end, all of YuWon's opponents couldn't withstand him and were completely defeated. YuWon and his team together conquered level 24, cheering and celebrating. They lifted YuWon high into the sky. Everyone gathered around YuWon, thanking him for carrying the burden of the stones like them on his shoulders. After that, they bid farewell. YuWon continued to climb the tower to the next level as the challenge concluded. YuWon received a total of 54,360 points and was gifted with the Vandu skill. Vandu is a skill that helps the user make their movements lighter and create an invisible path in the air for themselves in a short period. Before moving on to the next level, Mamos expressed his regret to YuWon, saying, "Well, it looks like we have to part ways from now on." Surprisingly, YuWon's attitude changed and he said to Mamos, "Let's continue together. We'll split up at level 25. Mamos was overjoyed, eagerly taking YuWon's hand and teleporting to the next level together. YuWon and Mamos arrived at the Tower of Anqua. YuWon accidentally overheard people mentioning the statues of the Knights of the Round Table. His gaze immediately focused on the statue of Arthur. Inside YuWon's gauntlet, Arthur looked up at his once glorious statue, feeling deeply regretful. He used to look so dashing and handsome. No wonder things had changed so much now. Mamos hurriedly approached YuWon from behind and said, "I heard the current king of Anqua is Lancelot, but that statue over there still holds its place." YuWon explained to Mamos, "Lancelot is just a temporary king." Mamos chuckled at Yuwon's words. How can Lancelot be just temporary? Moreover, King Arthur has been missing for centuries. Mamos continued to inquire, his mouth still running. I'm curious about what kind of person he is. Arthur built this kingdom, and then let Lancelot rule for 1,000 years. Yuwon sighed deeply. If you want to know why, perhaps you'll find out soon. Shortly after, the 31st night of the Round Table, Percival rode up on his horse. He looked at the crowd bustling before him and asked his attendants. They were the ones who had passed the individual player test and began to introduce themselves. Percival treated them with great respect, a demeanor completely different from Yuwon's. With Yuwon's sharp eyes, he could tell that Percival was not just any knight, he was greedy. Yuwon pondered, their greed is understandable, since no guild has ever surpassed the Knights of the Round Table in terms of development. They can dominate this level for the rest of their lives. Mamos, innocent as ever, asked Yuwon, are they the Knights of the Round Table? Among the riders present, only Percival was a knight. The rest were his attendants. Amidst the countless players, Mamos and Yuwon's demeanor suddenly caught Percival's attention. He began to inquire about their identities. After learning Yuwon's and Mamos' names, Percival continued, you both seem quite silent and confident. I am Percival, the 31st Knight of the Round Table. Today, I am here on the King's orders. We are searching among the newly ascended players for someone who can fill the empty seat at the Round Table. I will provide more details later. Perhaps you are all tired after the challenge, so rest for now. Then he ordered everyone to follow him to the capital of Anqua. As for where they were standing, it was just the border with other countries. Mamos grew more and more repulsed the longer he looked at Percival. He suspected that they were trying to lure Yuwon into some sort of trap. Suddenly, Yuwon pulled Mamos close to him and whispered, comforting him. Mamos' face turned as red as a young girl's, hesitatingly asking Yuwon if he was sure about his suspicions. He doubted that they were as despicable as he thought, but he would consider Yuwon's words carefully. Percival led the players to a massive wall and introduced it as the capital of Anqua, Camelot. Percival continued, saying a sentence that shifted everyone's mood from excitement to unease. To enter the city, everyone had to answer a question. Percival seemed to deliberately convey to Mamos that it was just the law of Anqua, which was strict against demons. This immediately stirred Mamos, who loudly protested, questioning the discrimination and outdated mindset. Yuwon, maintaining his composed demeanor, calmly asked Percival if Anqua indeed had such laws. Percival began to explain to all the players that this law was still a subject of controversy. Since the disappearance of the first king, everyone hoped for understanding, because this was a sensitive issue. At this moment, the gaze of the man shifted to Yuwon. He proposed a suggestion. If Yuwon could stand up as a witness for Mamos, then it would be a different matter. Mamos, seething with anger, wished he could burn Percival to ashes right away. Immediately, he interrogated Percival, demanding to know who would testify for him. He asserted that his very existence was evidence. Do you even know who my father is? Percival didn't bother about Mamos' father. In his eyes, Mamos was just another demon who had to abide by customs upon entry. Finally, Mamos couldn't bear the humiliation any longer. He erupted in flames, revealing his identity. My father is Belial, one of the top 7 demon lords, and among the top 100 rankers. I am the son of Belial, Mamos. Do you still dare to ask about my identity? Mamos began to name each person, following the principle of winner as king, loser as the father. The attendant next to Percival began to feel a headache and whispered to Percival, suggesting letting Mamos into the city. The city gates slowly opened. Mamos was extremely annoyed, continuously messaging Yuwon. I can't believe they don't want me in just because of my race. But you were right. Whenever I mention my father, they fall silent. How did you know about this? Have you studied the laws of Anqua? Meanwhile, as Yuwon took a few steps forward, the Trumchamoy began to react. Not only were they growing fangs, but they were also whimpering and crying out of hunger. Yuwon gradually understood that the reacting egg indicated the presence of some divine entity's trace, possibly an enemy of the divine. Perhaps it was a guardian bee ready to sting from behind. Here, at the gates of Anqua's Camelot, YuWon looked at their glove and asked Arthur why he was silent. Sensing Arthur's breath, YuWon realized that even as things changed elsewhere, some things remained the same. Arthur's soul escaped from the glove and flew out the window. The castle before them looked old, even older than Arthur. Arthur began to question YuWon, wondering why they had come to the castle. Could they have informed Olympus already? YuWon explained to Arthur that they were following Percival's instructions to meet Lancelot. However, Arthur's intentions seemed different. YuWon hinted at the idea that Arthur might meet someone. Arthur immediately guessed that the person YuWon wanted to meet was Merlin. He hesitantly asked YuWon, "Is it Merlin? Why would he come here?" YuWon simply replied, "He wants to ask for something, so I should meet him." Arthur couldn't hold back his tears, expressing his emotions. "I'm so touched. I thought you were someone who didn't care about others' feelings." In Arthur's eyes, YuWon always seemed to overthink everything, focusing too much on objectives and reasons. YuWon appeared as someone who always had a plan in place, equipped with the skills to execute it. Arthur began to wonder if YuWon did all this because of him. Arthur believed that perhaps YuWon, despite their strong will, was still just a low-level player, needing a pure heart to rise in rank. However, YuWon promptly dismissed Arthur's thoughts, asserting, "I didn't come here without thinking. Trust me, observe carefully. I will shake up Anqua." In a verdant garden within the castle, a maid expressed her gratitude to a man who had intervened to prevent Percival from severing her arm. She would have suffered this fate for the crime of tarnishing the armor of a knight of the Round Table. The man's dignified voice reminded her that not all knights of the Round Table were honorable, citing Percival as an example. He cautioned her to be careful, as unjust accusations could take their toll. The hesitant maid explained that she was new to the castle and had mistaken the man for someone of high status due to his presence. The man, using his magic to tend to the flowers, then asked if she wanted to know his name. He thanked her and offered to assist her with the garden, revealing himself to be none other than Merlin. Meanwhile, prompted by a sudden gust of wind, YuWon intentionally made remarks to someone about the current state of the knights, lamenting their lost virtues and honor. YuWon's presence caught Merlin's attention, who immediately recognized him and questioned if YuWon had been following him. YuWon introduced himself to Merlin, a name that struck a chord with the elder sorcerer. YuWon then explained his recent arrival to the 24th floor and expressed his surprise at finding Merlin. Merlin, with a hint of suspicion, inquired if YuWon had been following him. YuWon introduced himself to Merlin, and his name seemed vaguely familiar to the sorcerer. It appeared that someone new to the 24th floor had sought out Merlin, surprising him. YuWon slowly opened his inventory and retrieved a sword, Excalibur, which immediately drew a shocked expression from Merlin upon seeing it. Merlin inquired about where YuWon had obtained the sword, to which YuWon deliberately displayed it in front of him. Knowing that the story YuWon was about to tell would be lengthy, YuWon suggested finding a quiet place to talk. Merlin led YuWon to his private chamber and requested an explanation regarding the presence of Arthur's sword. YuWon recounted how he had come across the artifact while searching. Merlin struggled to contain his emotions as he explained to YuWon that he didn't know where Arthur had gone, but it had been over 1,000 years since any news of him had been heard, leaving Merlin deeply saddened by his absence. He expressed his profound longing for his old friend, emphasizing Arthur's importance to him. Merlin then asked YuWon if he had come to learn about the relationship between him and Arthur. YuWon began to recount his encounter with Arthur a few months prior. Merlin became visibly excited, wondering if Arthur might still be alive. YuWon then raised his hand, summoning the soul of Arthur from within his glove, manifesting it as a colossal OS operating system. Merlin regarded the summoned OS with suspicion, questioning why YuWon had chosen to summon it at that moment, suspecting foul play. YuWon refuted the notion, suggesting that Merlin should directly inquire with the OS to avoid misunderstandings. The OS, embodying Arthur's soul, spoke, expressing surprise at seeing his old friend. Merlin, deeply moved, immediately recognized the voice from his childhood. Tears welled up in his eyes as he called out Arthur's name, overwhelmed by the authenticity of the encounter despite Arthur's appearance as an OS. Merlin's emotional response caught Arthur off guard, as Merlin quickly accepted Arthur's true identity despite his current form, showing a stark contrast between Arthur's noble soul and his current appearance. Merlin rushed angrily to Arthur's side. Arthur quickly reassured Merlin to calm down, "Old friend. We're not in a resurrection cemetery." Merlin continued to question him. "So why do you look like that? You have that form." Arthur's cold iron eyes immediately turned to YuWon. "You transformed into this form, so everything must be told from YuWon." However, the main issue was not about revisiting the past. Arthur's appearance today was not for that. Arthur had something else to say. Merlin immediately interrupted Arthur, intending to talk about the one who killed him, right? But that wasn't what Arthur wanted to discuss either. "What I'm about to say is even more serious," he said to Merlin. "The one who killed my son is in this castle." Merlin was half suspicious. How could this happen? Arthur revealed the name of the one who killed his son, Lancelot. "He killed my son." Merlin couldn't contain his anger at this name, his rage radiating.